The air tasted of metal and dust. Zyla's lungs burned with each shallow breath as she curled tighter into the rusted ventilation shaft. Her translucent skin, normally a soft blue-green, had taken on a sickly gray pallor. The faint bioluminescent patterns that naturally adorned her Lyrian body had dimmed to almost nothing. A survival response, conserving energy while signaling her distress to no one but herself. 3 days since her escape pod had crashed on this desolate world. 3 days of hiding, of thirst barely quenched by moisture collected from overnight condensation, of hunger gnawing at her insides. The wound on her leg had stopped bleeding but throbbed with an alarming heat. From her hiding place in the ruined building, Zyla had a partial view of the wasteland beyond. This planet, she didn't even know its name, was nothing but rubble and dust, the forgotten battlefield of some ancient technological war. Twisted metal skeletons of structures rose from the barren ground like the ribs of enormous beasts. The perpetual haze in the atmosphere filtered the sunlight to a sickly amber glow. Her attention focused on the lone figure in the distance. She had first noticed him yesterday, working methodically among the ruins. A male humanoid. Human, if she wasn't mistaken, though she'd encountered few of their kind in her travels. He was tall and lean, with skin bronzed by exposure and dark hair cropped close to his skull. What had captivated her attention was his inexplicable task. He was building something from stone. Zyla watched, bewildered, as he hefted massive boulders, positioning them with careful precision. He used no gravitational assists, no molecular bonding tools, no construction drones, just his own physical strength and crude metal tools to shape and place the stones. It was primitive, inefficient, and utterly fascinating. In her world, her former world, no one would consider manual labor when technology could do it better. Why exhaust yourself when a simple command to a swarm of nanobots could accomplish the task perfectly? Yet there was something mesmerizing about watching him work, something almost artistic in the deliberate movements of his powerful body. Was he a scavenger? A survivor from a crashed ship like herself? Or something else entirely? Her scientist's mind cataloged possibilities, but her instinct for survival kept her frozen in place. A spasm of pain shot through her leg, and Zyla bit her lip to stifle a cry. The man paused in his work as if he'd heard something, and she held her breath. She couldn't risk detection by anyone. The galaxy believed Dr. Zyla Takreen was a traitor, a saboteur who had compromised the security of the Lyrian Defense Network. The truth, that she had discovered High Commander Vex's secret dealings with the Quarian smuggling cartels and refused to falsify the neural security protocols, would never be heard now. She closed her eyes, fighting the wave of despair. She had trusted the system, believed in justice, only to find herself branded a criminal by the very institution she had served faithfully. Her former colleagues had turned on her with frightening speed, and now enforcers hunted her across the stars. A distant mechanical hum snapped her back to alertness. Her heart rate spiked, the bioluminescent patterns on her skin flaring involuntarily before she could suppress them. She knew that sound. Everyone in civilized space knew that sound. Enforcement vessels. Zyla pressed her eye to a crack in the ventilation shaft, scanning the sky with rising panic. There, 2 sleek ships descending through the haze, their stealth systems disengaged now that they were within the atmosphere. Standard procedure for a final approach. They were looking for her. The ships landed with precision about half a kilometer away, sending clouds of dust billowing across the landscape. The human had stopped working, standing motionless as he observed the newcomers. Zyla's mind raced. She needed to move now, but where? The abandoned structure had seemed like a perfect hiding place, but it would become a trap once they deployed their bioscanners. As if on cue, blue lights began to pulse from the landed vessels. The enforcers were emerging, 2 figures in gleaming exo-armor that enhanced their already formidable Lyrian physiology. The armor's reflective surface caught the amber sunlight as they activated their scanning equipment. They would detect her within minutes. Zyla forced herself to move, ignoring the shooting pain in her leg. She backed out of the ventilation shaft into a collapsed corridor, assessing her options. The building had multiple exits, but all would leave her exposed in the open wasteland. Her only hope was to use the ruins as cover, to keep moving and somehow evade detection long enough to what? There was nowhere to go on this forsaken rock. She chose a path that would lead her away from both the enforcers and the human builder. Staying low, she moved from one piece of cover to the next, the dust clinging to her sweat-dampened skin and clothes. Her breathing came in ragged gasps, her weakened state making even this careful movement exhausting. A sudden beeping sound froze her in place. One of the scanner arrays had picked up her biological signature. The enforcers' helmets turned in her direction with mechanical precision, and they began to advance. Abandoning stealth for speed, Zyla broke into a run. Pain lanced up from her injured leg with each step, but adrenaline pushed her forward. She heard the distinctive whine of the enforcers' boost jets as they leaped across the rubble in pursuit. Fugitive Zyla to Kreen. A mechanically enhanced voice boomed behind her. Surrender immediately. Resistance will result in increased physiological correction upon capture. Physiological correction, a sanitized term for the neural reprogramming that would leave her an empty shell, a cautionary example for others who might consider defying the system. Zyla zigzagged through the ruins, using her smaller size to slip through gaps too narrow for the armor enforcers. But they were gaining ground, their enhanced speed and strength overcoming the minor obstacles she threw in their path. As she rounded a collapsed wall, her injured leg finally betrayed her. She stumbled, fell hard onto the dusty ground, and rolled to a stop against a heap of twisted metal. Looking up, she saw one of the enforcers land heavily, just meters away, the impact sending tremors through the ground. Target acquired. The enforcer stated flatly, the voice modulator stripping away any hint of emotion. Preparing for extraction. The second enforcer landed on her other side, cutting off any escape route. Surrender protocols initiated, it announced, raising a containment field projector. Zyla tried to scramble backward, but her body had nothing left to give. Her bioluminescent patterns flared bright with fear and exhaustion, betraying her emotional state to her pursuers. "Please," she gasped, though she knew it was futile. "You don't understand." Vexes. A tremendous crash interrupted her. The first enforcer's helmet swiveled sharply just as a massive boulder came hurtling through the air, smashing into its armored chest with stunning force. The impact sent the enforcer flying backward into a ruined wall, which collapsed under the combined weight. The second enforcer spun around, weapon systems activating, but the human was already in motion. Moving with a speed that seemed impossible for his kind, he vaulted over a pile of debris and landed directly on the enforcer's back. In his hand was what appeared to be a crude metal rod, which he drove with terrifying precision into a junction point in the armor. The small gap between helmet and shoulder plate that was one of the few vulnerabilities in the otherwise impenetrable exosuits. The enforcer jerked, systems shorting out from the disruption to the neural interface. Before it could recover, the human had shifted his grip and applied leverage with the metal rod, forcing the armored figure to its knees. With a motion both brutal and efficient, he wrenched the helmet off, exposing the Lyrian's face to the dusty air. The enforcer gasped, disoriented by the sudden disconnection from the armor systems. The human's fist connected with the Lyrian's temple in a precise strike, and the enforcer crumpled, unconscious. The first enforcer was struggling to extricate itself from the collapsed wall, its armor damaged by the impact of the boulder. The human walked calmly toward it, picked up another sizable rock from the ground, and with a powerful swing, smashed it against the already cracked faceplate. The armored figure went still. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 30 seconds. Zyla stared, unable to process what she had just witnessed. The enforcers were elite operatives with the most advanced combat technology in the galaxy. They had been disabled by a single human using rocks and a metal rod. The human turned toward her, his expression unreadable. Dust clung to his sweat-damp skin, but his breathing was barely elevated despite the exertion. His eyes, a startling pale blue against his tanned face, assessed her with an unsettling calm. Zyla tried to stand, to run, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. She could only watch as he approached, wondering if she had merely exchanged one danger for another. Instead of attacking, the human extended his hand toward her. When she didn't respond, he made a small gesture with his fingers, a clear invitation to follow him. Zyla hesitated. The enforcers would regain consciousness or be tracked by their command system. More would come. She had nowhere else to go, and her chances of survival alone were minimal. She took his hand. His grip was strong but careful as he helped her to her feet. Without a word, he guided her away from the confrontation site, supporting her weight when her injured leg threatened to buckle. They moved, purposefully through the ruins, toward the stone structure she had been observing from her hiding place. As they approached, Zyla realized it was more than just a pile of rocks. It was a deliberate construction, a shelter with thick walls and a narrow entrance that would be easily defensible. Inside, the temperature was noticeably cooler than the dusty heat outside, and the air less gritty. The interior was Spartan but organized. A sleeping pallet made of salvage materials occupied one corner. Tools hung from makeshift pegs in the wall. Various containers held what appeared to be collected water and preserved food. Everything spoke of careful planning and resourcefulness. The human gestured for her to sit on a flat rock that served as a bench. Then he went to one of the containers, returning with a cup of water which he offered to her silently. Zyla accepted it with trembling hands, taking small sips as she'd learned to do when dehydrated. The water was cool and surprisingly clean. The human watched her drink, then retrieved a package of what looked like dried meat or fruit. He placed it beside her without comment, then moved to the entrance where he could keep watch for any sign of pursuit. His silence was disconcerting, but Zyla was too exhausted and overwhelmed to initiate conversation. She ate slowly, feeling strength gradually return to her limbs, all while keeping a wary eye on her unexpected savior. Questions tumbled through her mind. Why had he helped her? What was a human doing alone on this devastated planet? How had he known how to disable the enforcers so efficiently? And most pressingly, what would he want in return for his assistance? But as the adrenaline faded, exhaustion took its place. Her eyelids grew heavy despite her efforts to stay alert. The last thing she remembered was the human's silhouette against the amber light from the entrance, standing guard as she drifted into unconsciousness. The rhythm of stones being stacked woke her. Zyla opened her eyes to find herself still in the stone shelter, a rough blanket draped over her. Her leg had been cleaned and wrapped with a primitive but effective bandage. By the quality of light, she guessed at least a full day had passed. The human was outside, adding to the shelter's structure. The methodical sound of stone upon stone had a strangely soothing quality. Zyla sat up cautiously, testing her strength. Her body ached, but the rest and food had done her good. The wound on her leg felt less inflamed. She made her way to the entrance, squinting in the harsh light. The human paused in his work, acknowledging her presence with a brief nod before continuing. Up close, she could see the scars that marked his exposed skin, old burns, cuts that had healed without proper medical attention, evidence of a hard life in this unforgiving environment. Zyla watched him work, fascinated by the economy of his movements. There was a focus to him, an intensity that suggested he was doing more than just stacking rocks. He was building something meant to last. "Thank you," she finally said, her voice rough from disuse. "For intervening." The human glanced at her, then gave another short nod, returning to his task. "Do you understand me?" she asked. He paused, looked directly at her this time, and spoke for the first time. "Yes." His voice was deep, slightly raspy, as if rarely used. "My name is Zyla." A moment of silence stretched between them before he responded. "Kale." It wasn't much, but it was a start. Zyla ventured another question. "Why did you help me?" Kale placed another stone carefully before answering. "They were enforcers. They don't belong here." The simplicity of his statement was striking. Not, "I wanted to help you," or "I was concerned," but a straightforward rejection of the enforcer's presence, as if their intrusion into his territory was reason enough for his actions. "Neither do I," Zyla pointed out. Kale studied her for a moment, his pale eyes unreadable. "You're not hunting." With that cryptic comment, he returned to his work. Zyla realized this was the most he was going to say on the matter for now. She retreated to the shelter, feeling the strain of even this brief activity on her recovering body. Over the next few days, a pattern emerged. Kale would leave at dawn, returning with water, occasionally food, and more stones for his ongoing construction. He spent most daylight hours working methodically, expanding the shelter or reinforcing existing walls. Zyla gradually recovered her strength, venturing out for longer periods, observing Kale's activities from a respectful distance. Their interactions remained minimal. Kale spoke only when necessary, using the fewest words possible to convey his meaning. He made no demands of her, asked no questions about why she was being pursued, displayed no curiosity about her alien nature. His acceptance of her presence was as pragmatic as everything else about him. As her strength returned, Zyla began to contribute in small ways. She organized the interior of the shelter, creating more efficient storage for their limited supplies. She figured out how to rig a simple alarm system using salvaged metal pieces that would rattle if disturbed. She kept watch while Kale worked, scanning the horizon for any sign of further pursuit. After a week, she found the courage to ask another question during one of their silent meals. "How long have you been here? On this planet?" Kale paused, seeming to calculate. 7 years. Zyla couldn't hide her surprise. "Alone, yes. By choice." For the first time, something flickered across his impassive features, a shadow of old pain. "No, not at first." He offered nothing more, and Zyla didn't press. Whatever had brought him here and kept him here was clearly not something he wished to discuss. She respected his reticence, given that she too harbored secrets. That night, as a dust storm howled outside, Zyla found herself sharing fragments of her own story. She didn't plan it, but the words came in the darkness, easier to speak when she couldn't see his reactions. "I was a systems architect for the Lyrian Defense Network," she said, her voice barely audible above the wind. "I designed security protocols, neural interfaces that could distinguish between authorized and unauthorized access." Kale said nothing, but she could tell he was listening. "I discovered irregularities, backdoors in the system that shouldn't have existed. They led to High Commander Vex, who was providing access to Quarian smuggling cartels in exchange for personal gain. When I reported it, I became the problem to be eliminated." She laughed bitterly. "They accused me of the very crime I uncovered. Suddenly, I was the traitor, the saboteur. My own colleagues testified against me. I barely escaped before they could arrest me." The silence stretched between them until Kale's voice emerged from the darkness. "Colonial engineer." Zyla waited, not understanding. "That's what I was," he elaborated. "Part of the Earth Expeditionary Force." It was the most he had revealed about himself, and Zyla recognized it for the exchange it was, trust for trust. "What happened?" she asked gently. "System war," Kale said simply. "Our colony was caught in the crossfire. Not meant to be a target. Wrong place." Zyla thought of the devastation outside. "This was your colony?" "Yes." After a pause, he added, "I was inspecting the outer perimeter when the bombardment began. Survived by chance." "And the others?" Zyla asked, though she suspected the answer. "All gone." 3 syllables that contained an entire world of loss. Zyla felt an ache in her chest for this solitary human who had endured years alone with his ghosts. "Why stay?" she asked. The silence stretched so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, his voice came, soft but resolute. "Someone should remember them." The simple dignity of his response moved her more than any elaborate justification could have. Kale had appointed himself witness and keeper of memory for people long forgotten by the galaxy at large. His stone building was not merely shelter. It was monument, testimony, defiance against the erasure of lives that had mattered to him. "I understand," she whispered, and in that moment, A connection formed between them, subtle but significant. Two fugitives from different worlds, bound by loss and betrayal, finding momentary shelter in shared understanding. The next morning, Kale woke to find Zyla already outside, attempting to move one of the smaller stones he had gathered for his building project. She struggled with its weight, her Lyrian physiology not evolved for such labor. Without comment, he joined her, adjusting her grip and showing her how to use leverage rather than pure strength. Together, they worked through the day, establishing a rhythm of cooperation. When she tired, she would sort smaller stones while he handled the heavier lifting. When the midday heat became too intense for her more sensitive skin, they retreated to the shelter where she showed him how to more efficiently filter the water they collected from a distant spring. Your kind builds with machines, Kale observed as they rested. Zyla nodded. Construction drones, molecular bonders, gravitational assists. Efficient, he acknowledged. But impersonal, she added, surprising herself with the admission. There's something meaningful about building with your hands. Feeling the weight, making the choices stone by stone. Kale studied her with that penetrating gaze, then nodded once, as if she had passed some unspoken test. Days blended into weeks. The shelter expanded, gaining an additional room, stonework that directed water collection during the infrequent rains, even primitive furnishings crafted from salvaged materials and stone. They developed wordless communication, a glance, a gesture, a rhythm of movement that required no verbal coordination. Zyla found herself revitalized by the physical work, her body adapting to demands so different from her previous life of intellectual labor. The bioluminescent patterns on her skin, once dim with stress and fear, began to display their natural cycles again, glowing softly in the darkness of their shelter at night. She noticed Kale watching the patterns sometimes, his expression unreadable. Unlike many, he showed no discomfort with her alien nature, no hesitation in sharing space with a being so different from himself. His acceptance was complete and unquestioning. One evening, as they sat outside watching the amber light fade from the sky, Zyla noticed something unusual on the horizon, a faint flickering that didn't match the normal atmospheric disturbances. "Kale," she said quietly, pointing. He followed her gaze, his body instantly tensing. Lights. Search pattern. Fear, so recently subdued, surged back through her. Enforcers? Possibly. He was already moving, gathering essential supplies. Or scavengers, attracted by the enforcement ships that crashed. Either possibility was dangerous. Enforcers would be searching specifically for her. Scavengers would likely kill them both for any valuable technology they might possess. "We need to move," Kale stated, handing her a pack he had apparently prepared for just such a contingency. "But you're home," Zyla protested, looking back at the stone structure that had become their sanctuary. "Just stones," Kale said simply, but she saw the regret in his eyes, the reluctance as he looked at the product of years of labor. They moved swiftly through the growing darkness, Kale leading them through the ruins with unerring precision. His knowledge of the terrain was their greatest advantage, allowing them to use pathways and hiding spots invisible to those unfamiliar with the devastated landscape. As they crested a ridge, Zyla could see the lights more clearly now, definitely artificial, moving in a coordinated pattern that suggested organized searchers rather than random scavengers. And there were more of them than she had initially thought. "Too many to fight," Kale murmured, echoing her thoughts. "We should split up," Zyla suggested reluctantly. "I'm the one they want." Kale's response was immediate and firm. "No." Before she could argue, a blinding light swept over the ridge. They dropped to the ground, but it was too late. They had been spotted. Movement detected. A mechanically enhanced voice called out. "Targets identified." Kale grabbed her hand, pulling her down the far side of the ridge. They ran through the darkness, the sounds of pursuit growing louder behind them. The terrain became more treacherous, massive chunks of broken buildings creating a maze of dead ends and narrow passages. They darted into a half-collapsed structure, pressing themselves against a wall as their pursuers passed by. Xyla's heart hammered in her chest, her bioluminescent patterns flaring despite her attempts to suppress them. Kale placed his hand over hers, the pressure strangely calming. When the immediate danger had passed, he led her deeper into the ruin, through passages that grew increasingly narrow until they emerged into a small, enclosed space that might once have been a storage unit or mechanical room. It was defensible, with only one entrance, and surprisingly intact. "We'll wait," Kale whispered. "They'll spread thin, searching." They sat in the darkness, listening to distant shouts and the hum of search equipment. Hours passed. Occasionally search parties would come near, but none discovered their hiding place. Xyla found herself leaning against Kale, drawing comfort from his solid presence, his unwavering calm. "Why didn't you leave me?" she asked softly. In the darkness, she felt rather than saw his shrug. "You would do the same." It was a statement, not a question, and she realized with some surprise that he was right. Somewhere in their weeks together, looking out for each other had become instinctive, assumed. "Yes," she confirmed. "I would." His hand found hers in the darkness, fingers intertwining. The contact sent a ripple of luminescence across her skin, casting a faint blue-green glow in their hiding place. For the first time, she saw Kale smile, a small change in his usually stoic expression, but transformative. They stayed hidden through the night. By morning, the search patterns had moved to a different sector. They cautiously made their way back toward their shelter, taking a circuitous route and stopping frequently to ensure they weren't being followed. When they finally approached the stone building, they were relieved to find it undisturbed. The searchers had apparently not yet discovered it. Kale immediately began reinforcing the entrance, adding stones to make it less visible from a distance, while Xyla gathered their scattered supplies. That evening, exhausted but safe, they sat closer than usual, the shared danger having shifted something fundamental. Between them, the silence between them had evolved from awkward to comfortable to something charged with unspoken meaning. "I haven't felt this way in a long time," Xyla admitted, watching her own bioluminescence create patterns of light on Kale's skin where their arms touched. He looked at her questioningly. "Safe," she clarified. "Not just physically, but seen." "Understood." Kale nodded slowly. "It's been a long time," he agreed, his usual economy of words somehow conveying volumes. Their eyes met, and Xyla felt a tightening in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. Slowly, giving him every chance to pull away, she leaned toward him. His hand came up to touch her face, calloused fingers gentle against her skin. When their lips met, it was hesitant, exploratory. So different, human and Lyrian, and yet the connection transcended those differences. The kiss deepened, became something hungry and healing all at once. Xyla's bioluminescence flared bright, her emotions too strong to contain, bathing them both in blue-green light. When they finally parted, Kale's eyes reflected the glow of her skin. "Beautiful," he said simply, tracing the patterns on her arm with a fingertip. That night, they lay together on the sleeping pallet, bodies intertwined, finding in each other's arms a respite from the harsh realities of their existence. There was gentleness in Kale's strength, a care in the way he touched her that belied his outward stoicism. And Xyla, who had lived so much in her mind, discovered the profound intimacy of physical connection, not just the act itself, but the trust and vulnerability it required. In the days that followed, they maintained vigilance, knowing the search could return to their area at any time. But they also found a new rhythm to their shared life, one that included moments of tenderness amidst the practicalities of survival. Kale began teaching Xyla more actively, how to move silently through the ruins, how to identify edible native plants, how to read weather patterns in the dust-laden sky. She, in turn, shared what she could of her knowledge, explaining stellar navigation, basic principles of the technology he encountered in the ruins, stories of the world she had visited. One day, as they were reinforcing the rear wall of their shelter, Xyla unearthed something unexpected, a small metal container, sealed against the elements. Kale went very still when she showed it to him. "Mine," he said, taking it from her with careful hands. From before, he opened it, revealing a few precious items saved from his former life. A data chip, likely containing personal information or images, a small metal insignia bearing the logo of the Earth Expeditionary Force, a braided bracelet made of synthetic and natural fibers, and most surprisingly, a handful of seeds in a preservation packet. Seeds? Zyla asked, curious. Colony crop, Kale explained. Adaptive strain, designed for terraforming. He held the packet with reverence. Never planted them. Seemed pointless. Zyla understood the weight of the moment. These seeds represented the purpose of the colony. New life, future growth, the transformation of a hostile environment into something nurturing. To plant them would have been an act of hope that Kale, alone and grieving, couldn't bring himself to perform. And now, she asked softly. Kale looked at her, then back at the seeds. Now might be time. They chose a spot near the shelter where runoff from the occasional rains created slightly more fertile soil. Together they prepared the ground, mixing in composted organic matter they had collected. Kale carefully opened the preservation packet, revealing seeds no larger than grains of sand. They may not germinate, he warned. It's been years. They might, Zyla countered. Life finds ways. They planted the seeds with deliberate ceremony, covering them with a thin layer of soil and constructing a small stone barrier around the plot to protect it from wind and foraging creatures. It was a small act, perhaps futile, but it carried enormous symbolic weight, a commitment to a future neither of them had dared envision before. That night, as they lay together watching the stars through a gap in the ceiling Kale had deliberately left unfinished, Zyla traced the scars on his chest, learning the history written on his body. "What will we do if more come looking for me?" she asked, voicing the fear that still lingered. Kale was quiet for a long moment. "Face it together," he finally said. "Like everything else. I've never had someone willing to stand with me," Zyla admitted. "In my world, alliances shifted with advantage. When I became a liability, everyone abandoned me. Not everyone is like that," Kale said, his arm tightening around her. "No," she agreed, looking up at him with a smile. "Not everyone." The intimacy between them continued to deepen, physical closeness mirroring emotional connection. Zyla found that Kale communicated more, through touch than words, a hand on her shoulder conveying reassurance, fingers intertwined with hers expressing affection, arms holding her close at night, saying more than declarations ever could. She discovered that his reticence wasn't coldness, but a deep well of feeling carefully contained. When he did speak, his words were chosen with such precision and honesty that they carried immense weight. He never said anything he didn't mean, never made promises he couldn't keep. Weeks passed without sign of renewed pursuit. They maintained caution but gradually extended their range, exploring the ruins more systematically, recovering useful materials, mapping the safest paths through the devastated landscape. Their shelter evolved from a defensive fortress to a true home, incorporating small comforts and personalized spaces. One morning, Zyla woke to find Kale already outside, kneeling by the seed plot they had created. She joined him, following his gaze to the small green shoots that had pushed through the soil, tender, fragile, but undeniably alive. "They made it," she said, wonder in her voice. Kale nodded, a complex emotion in his eyes. New beginning. He reached for her hand, pulling her gently to sit beside him as they watched the sun rise over their small miracle. In that moment, Zyla felt a profound shift in her understanding of home. It wasn't the advanced cities of Lyria with their gleaming spires and neural networks. It wasn't the defense ministry quarters she had once been proud to occupy. Home was here, in this primitive shelter built stone by stone with patient hands. Home was the quiet presence beside her, the shared struggle and shared joy. Home was the trust they had built between them, stronger than any molecular bond. Later that day, as they worked together to create an irrigation system for their fledgling garden, Zyla noticed a change in Kale. There was a lightness to him, a purpose beyond mere survival. His eyes found hers more frequently, and occasionally she caught him looking at her with an expression that made her bioluminescence respond involuntarily, rippling across her skin in patterns of affection and desire. That evening, as darkness fell, Kale took her hand and led her to the highest point of their shelter, a flat section of roof he had constructed with particular care. From there, they had a panoramic view of the ruined landscape, beautiful in its desolation under the emerging stars. "I was alone for a long time," he said, his voice low and steady. "Thought I would die here. Alone." Zyla squeezed his hand, encouraging him to continue. "Then you came." He turned to face her fully. Changed everything. For Kale, this was practically a speech. Zyla's throat tightened with emotion. "You saved me," she reminded him. "From the enforcers." He shook his head slightly. "Not what I mean. You gave me." He paused, searching for the right word. "Purpose. Beyond remembering. Beyond surviving." Understanding dawned on Zyla. For years, Kale had existed rather than lived, a solitary guardian of memory, building his stone monument while waiting for the end. Her presence had reconnected him to life, to possibilities, to a future that might contain more than endurance. She reached up to touch his face, tracing the lines that hardship and solitude had etched there. "You gave me that too," she told him. "Before you, I was just running afraid. Now I'm building something. With you." He turned his face to press a kiss into her palm. A gesture of such tenderness, it made her luminescence flare bright enough to illuminate the rooftop. Kale smiled, those rare smiles that transformed his austere features and revealed the man beneath the survivor. "Together," he said simply, drawing her into his arms. "Together," she agreed, tilting her face up to meet his kiss. Below them, the ruined world stretched in all directions, a reminder of all they had lost. But around them was the home they had built stone by stone. And within them was the connection they had forged, stronger than the forces that had tried to destroy them. Later, as they lay wrapped in each other's arms, Zyla imagined she could hear the tender shoots in their garden pushing upward through the soil, reaching for light despite the harsh conditions. Like those resilient seeds, she and Kale had found a way to not just survive, but to grow in the most unlikely of places. The future remained uncertain. The galaxy that had betrayed her still existed beyond this desolate planet. The forces that had hunted her might yet return. But for now, in this moment, Zyla felt a peace she had never known in her previous life of advancement and security. She had lost everything, only to find something more precious than she could have imagined. A connection based on acceptance rather than advantage. Strength forged in vulnerability. Love growing from the ruins of two shattered lives. As she drifted towards sleep, the patterns of light across her skin pulsing in. Rhythm with her contentment. A faint, unfamiliar sound caught her attention. She tensed, instantly alert, her luminescence dimming reflexively. Kale was already moving, his body shifting from relaxation to readiness in a heartbeat. He placed a finger to his lips, then pointed toward the ceiling. Zyla listened intently, filtering out the normal sounds of their environment. There was again a high, thin whine, nearly imperceptible but unmistakable to someone who had spent her life surrounded by advanced technology. Something was in orbit around the planet. They dressed quickly and moved to the observation point they had established for such contingencies. The night sky was clear, the stars brilliant against the darkness. Kale handed her the crude but effective viewing scope he had assembled from salvage parts. Zyla scanned the heavens methodically until she found it. A small craft, too small for long-range travel, silhouetted briefly against the larger of the planet's two moons. Not an enforcement vessel, at least not one of the standard models. But definitely artificial, definitely powered, and definitely in a search pattern. "Probe ship," she whispered. "Automated or minimal crew. They're scanning." "For you?" Kale asked, his voice equally low. "Possibly. Or for resources, or survivors, or any number of things." She continued to track the vessel's movement. "If it's looking for Lyrian biosignatures, my presence here could trigger an alert." Kale's face hardened with resolve. "We prepared for this." They had indeed prepared, discussing contingency plans during the weeks of relative peace. But the reality of potential discovery sent a chill through Zyla that had nothing to do with the night air. "If they find me," she said carefully, "they won't stop coming. You know that." Kale's hand found hers in the darkness. "We face it together," he reminded her, repeating his earlier promise. "But they haven't found us yet." They watched the probe ship complete several orbits, its scanning pattern clearly visible to Zyla's trained eye. It was thorough, but not particularly focused on their area, a positive sign. Perhaps it was a routine resource survey or following up on the crashed enforcement vessels without specific knowledge of her presence. After nearly an hour, the ship changed course, moving toward the planet's northern hemisphere. They maintained their vigil until it disappeared beyond the horizon. "It might come back," Zyla warned as they returned to their shelter. "Then we'll be ready," Kale replied with characteristic simplicity. But the encounter had shaken something loose in Zyla, a realization that their peaceful existence was inherently temporary. The galaxy beyond this forgotten rock continued its machinations. High Commander Vex's corruption undoubtedly flourished. The truth she had discovered remained buried beneath fabricated accusations. "I can't hide forever," she said quietly as they lay back down, sleep now a distant possibility. Kale propped himself up on one elbow, studying her face in the dim glow of her bioluminescence. "What are you thinking?" She took a deep breath. "That running isn't enough. That someday I need to clear my name. That what Vex is doing threatens more than just me." She expected Kale to argue for caution, for continued isolation. Instead, he nodded slowly. "You want to fight back," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Not revenge," she clarified. "Justice. Truth. But I don't even know where to begin. I have no resources, no allies except you, no way off this planet." Kale was silent for a long moment, his face unreadable in the darkness. When he finally spoke, his words surprised her. "The Northern Research Station," he said. "It was built to withstand the bombardment. Subterranean levels. If anything survived intact." Zyla sat up, excitement cutting through her fatigue. "You know of a research station? Why haven't you mentioned this before?" "Too far. Too dangerous alone." He sat up as well, facing her. "And nothing there I needed. Until now. What might we find there?" "Communications equipment. Transport perhaps. Records." He shrugged slightly. "Or nothing. It's been years." It was a slim hope, but more than she'd had moments before. A research station might have the technology they needed to access information networks, to gather evidence, to perhaps even signal potential allies. "How far?" she asked. 10 days' journey. Through the worst of the ruins. Areas I've avoided." The implication was clear. It would be dangerous, physically demanding, and would require them to leave the safety of the home they had built together. "We don't have to decide now," Zyla said, sensing his reluctance. "The probe ship might not return. We could have more time." Kale's hand found hers in the darkness. "Time for what?" "More hiding." His question cut to the heart of the matter. What were they building here? A life, or merely a prolonged delay of the inevitable? Their garden was growing, their home becoming more comfortable, their bond deepening with each passing day. But outside forces would eventually intrude, as the probe ship had demonstrated. "I don't want to lose this," Zyla admitted, gesturing to encompass their shelter, their garden, the life they had created. "I don't want to lose you." "You won't," Kale said with such certainty that she almost believed him. "But you're right. About facing the truth. About justice." His support meant everything. He understood, perhaps better than anyone could, what it meant to be the sole witness to an injustice, to carry the burden of truth when the powerful preferred lies. "We'll need to prepare," she said, already mentally cataloging the supplies they would need for such a journey. "Tomorrow," Kale agreed. "Tonight, rest." He drew her back into his arms, and despite the uncertainties that now swirled around them, Zyla found comfort in his solid presence, in the steadiness of his heartbeat against her cheek, in the arms that had become her sanctuary in this desolate world. Morning brought renewed determination. They spent the day gathering and organizing supplies, reinforcing their packs, discussing strategies for the journey ahead. Kale drew maps in the dirt, showing her the route they would take, highlighting areas of particular danger or difficulty. They decided to wait 3 more days, time enough to harvest some of their garden's first yield, to ensure the probe ship didn't return to make final preparations. Those days passed in a strange combination of intense activity and heightened awareness of small pleasures that might soon be left behind. The particular way sunlight slanted through the ceiling gap in late afternoon, the sensation of cool stone against their backs as they rested, the simple joy of watching their plants reach toward the sky. On the third evening, as they made final adjustments to their packs, Zyla noticed Kale repeatedly glancing at the metal container that held his few personal possessions from before. Finally, he opened it, removing the Earth Expeditionary Force insignia and the braided bracelet. "For you," he said, holding out the bracelet. "Protection." Zyla accepted it with reverence, understanding this was no small gesture from a man who had clung to these few remnants of his past life through years of solitude. The bracelet was surprisingly soft against her skin as she tied it around her wrist. "What was it originally?" she asked. "Made from colony landing chutes." After arrival, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Everyone had one. Symbol of new beginning." Zyla touched it gently, honored by the gift and its significance. "I'll treasure it." Kale nodded, then pinned the insignia to the strap of his pack. Not hidden away anymore, but displayed, embraced as part of his identity again. It was a small change, but a profound one. They rose before dawn the next morning. After a final check of their supplies, they stood together at the entrance of their stone home, committing it to memory. The garden, still small but thriving, would have to fend for itself. The shelter, built stone by stone over years, would stand empty, waiting. Kale placed his hand on the stone doorway, a silent farewell to the structure that had been his only companion for so long. Zyla matched his gesture, her smaller hand beside his on the cool stone. "We'll return," she promised, though they both knew the future held no certainties. Kale nodded, his jaw set with determination. Then he shouldered his pack, checked the crude but effective weapons he had fashioned, and stepped away from the shelter. Zyla followed, her own pack secure, her mind focused on the journey ahead. They moved through the ruins with practiced efficiency, following paths they had scouted and marked during previous explorations. As they traveled farther from their home territory, the landscape grew increasingly unfamiliar and challenging. The devastation was more complete here, the collapse more chaotic, creating treacherous terrain that demanded constant vigilance. Kale set a pace that was sustainable but relentless. They walked from first light until dusk each day, stopping only for brief rests and necessary sustenance. At night, they created temporary shelters from available materials, never staying in one place long enough to attract attention. On the fourth day, they encountered the first sign of other presences, a crude camp that had been abandoned perhaps a week earlier. Scavengers, Kale determined from the evidence left behind, likely human or near human, traveling in a small group, picking through the ruins for technology or materials they could sell. "Will they be a problem?" Zyla asked as they cautiously circled the abandoned camp. "If we meet them, yes," Kale replied. "They'll want your tech. My supplies. Whatever they can take." They adjusted their route to avoid potential contact, adding an extra day to their journey, but reducing the risk of hostile encounters. The desolation of the planet had always been their ally, its uninhabitable nature keeping away all but the most desperate or determined. They intended to maintain that advantage as long as possible. On the sixth day, Zyla noticed a change in the ruins they were traversing. The structures became more regular, the materials more sophisticated. They were entering what had once been a major settlement or installation. "Research district," Kale confirmed when she asked, where they developed the terraforming systems, agricultural adaptations, atmospheric processors. His knowledge of the colony's layout and purpose was extensive, belying his role as a simple colonial engineer. Zyla suspected there was more to his past than he had revealed, but she didn't press. They each kept certain parts of themselves private, respecting the boundaries the other established. That night, sheltered in what had once been a subterranean storage facility, they faced a new challenge. The temperature dropped precipitously, a weather front moving in that brought biting cold. Their supplies included basic thermal protection, but it would not be enough for comfortable rest. Without discussion, they arranged their sleeping gear together, combining resources and sharing body heat. As they lay close beneath the makeshift coverings, Xyla's bioluminescence provided gentle illumination against the absolute darkness of their underground shelter. "Tell me about Lyria," Kale requested unexpectedly, his voice low in the darkness. "Your home." It was rare for him to ask personal questions. Xyla thought carefully before responding, sifting through memories both painful and precious. "It's a world of light and water," she began. "3 small continents surrounded by vast oceans. Our cities are built to capture and reflect light, crystal and polymer structures that seem to float above the landscape. At night, the bioluminescence of my people turns the cities into constellations of blue and green and purple." She described the advanced technology that permeated Lyrian society, the neural networks that connected citizens to information and each other, the harmony they had achieved with their environment through sophisticated adaptation rather than transformation. "But it has darkness too," she admitted. "The same connectivity that brings benefits also enables control. The same technology that heals can be weaponized. The same institutions meant to protect can be corrupted." Kale listened without interruption, his hand absently tracing the luminescent patterns on her arm as she spoke. "Do you miss it?" he finally asked. "Parts of it," she acknowledged. "The beauty, the knowledge resources, certain people, but not the illusions, not the politics, not the sense that I was just a component in a system I couldn't fully see or understand." She shifted slightly to look at his face, barely visible in the dim light. "What about Earth? Do you miss it?" Kale was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was softer than usual, tinged with a wistfulness she rarely heard from him. "Earth is complex, crowded, contradictory." He searched for words, his usual economy of language failing to capture what he wanted to express. "People everywhere, buildings that reach the clouds, forests older than civilization, deserts, mountains, oceans." He spoke of diversity, of cultures, languages, ecosystems, with a depth of feeling that revealed how deeply he valued it. He described technological advancement alongside deliberate simplicity, harmony intertwined with conflict, beauty coexisting with degradation. The colony was supposed to be the best of Earth, he said, without the worst, a balanced beginning. The loss reflected in those few words was profound. Not just personal grief for colleagues and friends, but mourning for potential unrealized, for a future that had been annihilated before it could truly begin. "You honor them," Xyla said gently, "by surviving, by remembering, by helping me." Kale's arm tightened around her. "We honor them by seeking truth, justice." She understood then that his decision to accompany her, to actively pursue the evidence that might clear her name and expose Vex's corruption, wasn't solely for her benefit. It was also a way to give meaning to the loss he had endured, to ensure that the destruction that had claimed his colleagues served some purpose beyond senseless waste. They fell silent, the connection between them deepened by this exchange of memories and motivations. As sleep finally claimed her, Xyla felt a certainty that transcended their uncertain circumstances. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it as partners, their separate paths now inextricably joined. The remaining days of their journey tested their endurance and resolve. The terrain grew increasingly hazardous, requiring detours and careful navigation. Resources became scarcer, forcing them to ration. Supplies. Once they spotted a scavenger vessel in the distance and spent a tense day hiding in the ruins until it moved on. Finally, on the 11th day, they reached the ridge overlooking their destination. Below them, partially buried by debris and dust, lay the Northern Research Station, a sprawling complex of reinforced structures, most severely damaged, but one central building relatively intact. Main facility, Kale identified it, built to withstand atmospheric pressure variations during terraforming. reinforced against geological instability. They observed for a full day before approaching, watching for any sign of occupation or automated defenses. The complex appeared abandoned, but caution had kept them alive this long. They wouldn't risk everything on appearances. When they finally descended to the facility, they moved with practiced coordination, covering each other, communicating with hand signals, maintaining awareness of potential threats. The main entrance was buried under collapsed debris, but Kale located a service access point that remained partially clear. It took hours of careful work to create an opening large enough to enter. As dusk approached, they squeezed through the narrow aperture into absolute darkness. Their small light sources revealed a utility corridor, dusty but remarkably intact, leading deeper into the facility. Power systems would be lower levels, Kale said, his voice hushed in the enclosed space. If anything, still functional. They made their way cautiously through the silent facility, moving deeper into its subterranean levels. Emergency lighting activated sporadically as they progressed, suggesting backup systems remained partially operational even after years of abandonment. A promising sign. The research station was a maze of laboratories, equipment rooms, and control centers. Many areas were inaccessible due to structural damage or sealed emergency protocols. But as they explored, they found sections that had been protected by the same robust engineering that had allowed the central building to survive the bombardment. In one of these protected areas, they discovered what they had been hoping for, a primary control center with independent power systems, designed to function even if the rest of the facility failed. Kale worked methodically to activate the dormant systems, his engineering background evident in his confident handling of the technology. Zyla watched in growing excitement as screens flickered to life, systems initiated boot sequences, and diagnostic protocols ran. After years of technological isolation, the sudden immersion in advanced systems was both exhilarating and overwhelming. Communication array status? She asked, scanning the incoming data. Damaged, but reparable. Kale responded, his focus intense. Orbital relay destroyed, but short-range capabilities intact. It wasn't enough to reach off-planet directly, but it was a start. More importantly, the facility's data cores appeared to be functional. If they contained research data, colony records, or access codes to wider networks, it could provide the foundation they needed. They worked through the night, Zyla's expertise with systems architecture complementing Kale's practical engineering knowledge. By morning, they had established a secure operating environment within the facility's network, isolated from any external monitoring that might detect their activities. What they found exceeded their most optimistic hopes. The data cores contained not only colony records and research data, but also cache communications, security protocols, and most critically, access pathways to wider government and corporate networks. These would be outdated, Zyla cautioned as they examined the access codes. But they give us a starting point, places to look for vulnerabilities, backdoors into systems that might not have been properly updated or maintained. The real prize came when they discovered the research station's secure archives. As a sensitive installation developing proprietary terraforming technology, the facility had maintained comprehensive surveillance and record-keeping. Those records included detailed documentation of all official communication with Earth command structures and corporate sponsors. "Look at this," Zyla said, highlighting a series of transmissions dated shortly before the bombardment. These communications reference orbital defense protocols being modified without proper authorization, access granted to external systems for maintenance and upgrades. Kale's expression darkened as he reviewed the data. The colony was deliberately exposed. Shields compromised. Warning systems disabled. The implications were staggering. The destruction of the colony hadn't been accidental collateral damage in a wider conflict. It had been facilitated, perhaps even orchestrated, by elements within the very power structures meant to protect it. "This connects," Zyla said, her mind racing, as she pieced together the fragments. "The backdoors I found in the Lyrian defense network. The unauthorized access points. It's the same pattern." She called up her own memories of the security breaches she had discovered, comparing them to the access patterns documented in the colony records. The similarities were too specific to be coincidental. Vex wasn't working alone, she realized. This is bigger than quarry and smuggling cartels or personal profit. This is systematic compromise of defense systems across multiple jurisdictions. Why? Kale asked, the single word laden with years of unresolved grief and anger. Zyla shook her head. I don't know yet, but with these records, we can start to build a case. Find the connections. Identify who benefits from these security failures. They spent days sifting through the data, establishing secure methods to access external networks without revealing their location, building a comprehensive picture of the corruption that spanned multiple worlds and power structures. The work was painstaking, requiring all of Zyla's expertise in systems architecture and Kale's practical knowledge of colonial operations. As the evidence accumulated, a disturbing pattern emerged. The security compromises weren't random or opportunistic. They followed strategic objectives, creating vulnerabilities in specific defense systems while leaving others intact. It suggested coordination, long-term planning, and resources beyond what a single corrupt official or criminal organization could command. This is preparation, Kale said grimly as they reviewed their findings. Positioning for something bigger. Zyla agreed. The question is, what happens next? And who can we trust with this information? That question hung between them, unanswered but urgent. They had gathered compelling evidence, but evidence was useless without a pathway to justice. They needed allies, resources, a way to ensure the truth wouldn't be buried again. As they deliberated their next steps, Zyla found herself increasingly drawn to the personal aspects of their discovery. The evidence clearing her name was now indisputable. The security breaches she had reported had been real, part of a larger pattern of corruption. Her accusers had been complicit or manipulated into silencing her. But vindication felt hollow compared to the magnitude of what they had uncovered. Her personal injustice was a mere footnote in a conspiracy that had already claimed an entire colony and threatened who knew how many more lives. One evening, as they took a rare break from their investigation, they climbed to the surface to watch the sunset. The amber light painted the ruins in gold and shadow, a beautiful apocalypse. They sat together on a fallen column, shoulders touching, sharing the simple pleasure of open air after days in the enclosed facility. What will you do? Kale asked quietly. When we find a way to transmit this evidence. When your name is cleared. The question caught her off guard. She had been so focused on uncovering the truth that she hadn't fully considered what would come after. Continue the investigation, she said automatically. Find the connections. Stop whatever they're planning. Kale nodded, his face unreadable. And after, the word opened a vista of possibilities that both thrilled and terrified her. After justice, after vindication, after this mission that had given purpose to her flight. I don't know, she admitted. Then, turning to him with sudden intensity, what will you do? Will you leave this planet, if we find a way? It was the question that had been forming between them, unspoken but inevitable. Their paths had converged under extraordinary circumstances. Would they diverge again when those circumstances changed? Kale looked out over the ruined landscape that had been his solitary home for 7 years. I stayed to remember, he said slowly, to bear witness. And now, Zyla prompted gently. He turned to her, his pale eyes reflecting the golden light. Now I have something to live for, not just to remember. The simplicity and depth of his declaration moved her beyond words. She leaned into him, her luminescence pulsing with emotion, creating patterns of light and shadow across both their skins. Together, she whispered, echoing their earlier promise. Together, he confirmed, his arm encircling her waist. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they remained on their perch, watching the stars emerge from the darkening sky. The same stars that had witnessed their separate tragedies now oversaw their joined purpose. The same desolation that had isolated them had also protected their growing bond. Somewhere among those stars, powerful forces were moving according to hidden agendas. Corruption spread through systems meant to safeguard civilization. Truths were buried beneath convenient lies. But here, in this moment, Zyla and Kale had found something rare and precious: absolute trust, shared purpose, and a connection that transcended the boundaries of their different worlds. Whatever came next, justice or continued struggle, vindication or further challenges, they would face it as they now face the night. Side by side, their separate strengths united, creating light in the darkness. A distant rumble drew their attention to the western sky. A momentary flare of light, too regular to be natural, too brief to identify. Another ship? Zyla wondered, tension returning to her body. Maybe, Kale acknowledged, already standing, alert and ready. They watched the sky for several minutes, but no further signs appeared. Still, the brief interruption served as a reminder. The universe continued its course around them. Time was not infinite. Decisions would need to be made. As they descended back into the facility, Zyla felt a renewed sense of urgency, tempered by absolute certainty in one critical aspect. Whatever path they chose, they would travel it together. The home they had built stone by stone might someday be left behind, but the bond they had forged would endure, stronger than any physical structure, more lasting than any single world. In the control room, illuminated by the glow of screens and Zyla's gentle bioluminescence, they returned to their work with renewed purpose. The evidence they gathered might bring justice or merely survival. It might change worlds or only their personal fates. But the truth they uncovered together had already transformed them both, creating something neither had expected to find in the ruins of their former lives. Hope, not just for justice, but for a future worth building, stone by stone.